Keep your hands off me. Why are your people touching me like this?
Because you need to wait.
Let go of me.
The meek may inherit the earth, but a bold preacher has his eye on the heavens, and he's asking his flock to get him there in style.
How does a televangelist, notorious for lavish spending, survive a world increasingly wary of religious prosperity claims? Jesse Duplantis, known for his grand promises and outspoken faith, has found himself under intense scrutiny. From asking followers for a private jet to weathering harsh criticism, his public image is facing serious trouble. With mounting questions about accountability and sincerity, Jesse's ministry is grappling with a growing wave of skepticism. What happens when faith meets controversy? And how do financial demands impact a preacher's credibility? The story unfolding is complex, and the stakes couldn't be higher. Financial controversies. Jesse Duplantis has been no stranger to headlines centered on his financial appeals, sparking widespread discussion and controversy. Perhaps most famously, he publicly requested a private jet from his followers, arguing that it was essential for his ministry's global reach. The demand, framed as a divine directive, caused immediate backlash and led many to question the ethics of asking congregants for such lavish gifts. Critics saw this as emblematic of an unchecked culture of excess in parts of televangelism, where faith and fundraising intertwine in contentious ways. This call for expensive donations is not an isolated incident, but part of a broader pattern in Duplantis's fundraising efforts. Over the years, his ministry has consistently sought large sums from donors, sometimes linking financial support with spiritual blessings or prophetic promises. These tactics have raised eyebrows among watchdog organizations that monitor religious nonprofits, sparking investigations and public critiques. Accusations of exploiting believers financially have stuck, challenging the transparency and accountability of his operations. Supporters argue that Duplantis's followers willingly embrace his vision and gifts, seeing donations as acts of faith and investment in a ministry that delivers powerful messages. However, this perspective contrasts sharply with those who question whether such grand financial appeals exploit vulnerable followers, especially in economically difficult times. Conversations about the moral responsibilities of spiritual leaders have intensified, touching on the fine line between fundraising and financial manipulation in religious contexts. Financial disclosures connected to Duplantis's ministry reveal what looks like real income. Still, critics keep saying there's not much clarity about where the money goes and how it gets used, or even who handles it on a day-to-day basis. People keep asking about administrative costs, how personal wealth might be growing, and whether donor contributions genuinely back charitable work or mostly end up supporting lavish lifestyles. The transparency problems stack up on top of the skepticism many already feel, and it makes folks wonder more about the motives behind some of his financial demands. In practice, this opacity seems to intensify concerns about ethics and governance inside prosperity-driven ministries. Even with all the controversies, Duplantis doesn't really back away. He stays unapologetic, and he often repeats that material prosperity is a sign of divine favor. He also frames generous giving as something that will circle back and bless donors. That storyline lands well with many members of his audience, but it clashes with mainstream Christian teachings that caution against materialism and that stress humility instead. So the push to treat wealth as proof of spiritual approval versus the call to practice responsible stewardship keeps creating tension. The result is an ongoing debate that stays alive and is kind of divisive, if not all the time, then at least frequently. The jet request kinda drew criticism from other Christian leaders who publicly condemned the extravagance and said it messes up the bigger message of faith, you know, that whole thing. Then the media kept amplifying those critiques, basically painting Duplantis as out of touch with the economic realities regular believers are dealing with. Public opinion, and especially among younger believers, seems more and more doubtful about televangelists who push that kind of luxury, while calling it a ministry necessity. Still, these financial controversies have, in a strange way, boosted Duplantis's fame, and maybe even brought more attention to his ministry. Whether that turns into sustained support or ends in a backlash later really depends on how he handles the situation from here. And as legal and ethical scrutiny keeps rising, the pressure for clearer accountability and revised ways of fundraising is getting louder too. The scrutiny over his financial dealings sets the backdrop for another area under fire: his lifestyle, which many see as a reflection of the very controversies his fundraising raises. Lavish lifestyle criticism. Jesse Duplantis has become synonymous in many media circles with a lifestyle that many consider extravagant and hard to reconcile with traditional pastoral humility. Reports and images of luxury homes, expensive cars, and other signs of wealth have accompanied his ministry for years, fueling criticism from both secular observers and fellow Christians. This lifestyle contrasts starkly with the modest means of many churchgoers and the humble example often expected of religious leaders. One high-profile instance was the exposure of Duplantis, owning a multi-million-dollar residence in Louisiana's exclusive neighborhoods. The size and opulence of his home sparked sharp public commentary, framing him as emblematic of prosperity gospel pastors who preach abundance while living far beyond ordinary means. Critics argue this fosters mistrust and cynicism toward religious institutions and detracts from their spiritual missions. Similarly, his collection of luxury vehicles and reports of lavish spending on personal comforts have further alienated some followers and raised questions about priorities. These possessions, when spotlighted by media or watchdog groups, have been portrayed as symbols of excess, in contrast to the economic struggles faced by many Christians. The optics of such wealth can seem incongruent, especially when linked to aggressive donation campaigns. Defenders say wealth isn't automatically wrong in ministry, like God might bless loyal leaders with money and success as a kind of sign that divine favor is real. They argue that Duplantis puts his resources toward worldwide missions and relief work, charity in general. Still, a lot of people don't fully buy it because there is limited transparency about what gets donated versus what gets kept for personal needs or admin things and overhead and all that. That whole tension around Duplantis' lifestyle kind of echoes bigger fights inside the Christian world about prosperity gospel ideas and what kind of standard of living church leaders should actually have. Some people insist that public religious figures should live simply and share readily, while others lean into a theology where material blessings count as spiritual rewards. And this split keeps turning into loud debates online, and in person too. Also, the reaction has shown up in social media criticism, memes, and viral posts that basically tease his requests for a private jet, and then all those visible displays of wealth. The more negativity builds, the more it affects his reputation. And it also muddies how people see televangelism overall. For younger generations who often look for authenticity, these extravagant gestures usually seem to weaken credibility rather than strengthen it. Even with the backlash, Duplantis appears to have little urge to slow down or adjust his lifestyle and messaging. He seems to double down on his idea of divine provision, plus the belief that giving generously has real power. But doing that could end up making the rift wider between him and a religious audience that is getting more and more focused on integrity and also on social responsibility. The spotlight on Jesse Duplantis' lifestyle naturally leads us to the theology underpinning his ministry, one closely tied to these financial and material excesses. Theology of prosperity. At the heart of Jesse Duplantis' teachings lies the prosperity gospel, a theology that links faith and devotion with material wealth and health. This doctrine asserts that God rewards believers with prosperity as a sign of blessing and favor, encouraging followers to give generously with the promise of divine return. For Duplantis, this theology is foundational, shaping both his message and ministry practices. The prosperity message appeals to many because it offers hope for tangible improvement in life circumstances. It promises that spiritual faith can unlock financial success, physical healing, and overall well-being. This outlook attracts followers who desire both spiritual and material breakthroughs, creating a powerful emotional connection that fuels donation and engagement. Critics say prosperity theology can bend traditional Christian teachings a bit too much, like it treats wealth as some kind of spiritual gauge while leaving out the messy stuff, suffering, humility, and even social justice. For them, it looks like a setup, a whole framework that may pressure fragile believers by tying money to God's favor. In their view, this message shows up when ministries ask for big gifts and then preach promises that if you give financially, you'll get a personal blessing back. Duplantis is often criticized for using scripture only in parts, pulling out the verses that sound like abundant life or divine provision. So his sermons usually revolve around faith acting like a catalyst for receiving wealth, telling people to move boldly when they give. Somehow, it blends theology with fundraising in a way that can make sincere spiritual devotion feel tangled up with material expectations, which is exactly why some people side-eye it. And this mixing, prosperity talk alongside Duplantis' own lifestyle, plus those fundraising appeals, strengthens the idea to supporters and skeptics alike. Wealth turns into more than just a spiritual dream. It becomes a practical, maybe even required, condition for ministry expansion and for personal comforts. That's where the uncomfortable questions start piling up about motives and real-world impacts. Still, even with all the theological back and forth, the prosperity gospel stays pretty influential in many places, and Duplantis reaches far beyond one region. His message travels globally through television and also through digital platforms. His claim that believers can claim wealth and health as birthrights lands with a lot of people. They feel seen and they connect it to hope. But other listeners interpret it differently, as a troublesome doctrine that feeds entitlement, and it can pull attention away from the core values of Christianity. Understanding the theological foundations helps explain why financial controversies and lifestyle choices are not just side issues, but central to the story of Jesse Duplantis. Media and public backlash. Jesse Duplantis' controversial public image has made him a frequent target of media scrutiny and widespread criticism. The request for a private jet in particular went viral, igniting a firestorm on social media where many ridiculed the televangelist for asking his followers to finance a luxury often associated with extreme wealth. News outlets and watchdog groups seized on this moment to question the broader practices of prosperity gospel ministries, using Duplantis as a high-profile example of excess and insensitivity. Beyond the jet request, investigative reports and documentary features have explored his ministry's finances, spending habits, and theological claims. These portrayals often highlight a disconnect between Duplantis' extravagant lifestyle and the economic realities of many churchgoers. Christian commentators and secular journalists alike have debated whether such displays ultimately affect the credibility of evangelical Christianity and breed skepticism among the general public. Media coverage has also highlighted growing calls for accountability and transparency in religious organizations, with Duplantis frequently referenced in discussions about financial oversight and ethical leadership. Several watchdog organizations have issued statements or reports about Duplantis' ministry, emphasizing the need for open financial records and responsible stewardship. This environment has made it increasingly difficult for televangelists who operate with limited transparency to maintain unchallenged authority. Public backlash has sort of moved past the usual channels of traditional media, and it's now spilling into online communities where clips of Duplantis' sermons and fundraising appeals get pulled apart, analyzed, and kinda mocked. Memes and viral videos do that thing where they overstate his more audacious claims, so he ends up as a figure of satire, especially for younger viewers. So this whole online moment helps nudge perception of televangelism, where reverence doesn't just fade. It often flips into incredulity or straight-up parody. To counter all that, Duplantis and his team sometimes push back. saying critics misunderstand them or they misrepresent what they are aiming for. They say their mission is faith-driven and focused on spiritual empowerment, not materialism or greed. At least that is the line they give. Still, the non-stop negative attention puts real pressure on the ministry, and it makes them rethink communication strategies, plus how they show up in public. And then, the backlash has led other evangelical leaders to publicly distance themselves from Duplantis. This highlights the splits inside the Christian community, particularly around prosperity theology and its perceived excesses. Some pastors have even condemned his approach, and they frame it like a cautionary story, almost like a warning example. These rifts also make it harder for Duplantis to keep his influence growing beyond his core followers. Even with all the criticism, Duplantis still maintains a loyal base of supporters. They tend to embrace his teachings, and they actively defend his ministry. His television broadcasts, online channels, and live events still bring in people looking for the messages of hope and abundance he promises. As the ministry grapples with mounting criticism, it also confronts questions about how this media scrutiny reverberates among those closest to the message, its congregation and followers. Ministry impact and followers' response. The controversies surrounding Jesse Duplantis have not only played out in public, but have also had tangible effects within his own community and congregation. Among longtime followers, reactions range from steadfast support to growing unease. Many remain deeply committed to Duplantis' teachings, believing firmly in his call to faith, prosperity, and spiritual breakthrough. For these believers, public criticism often feels like an attack on their faith itself. However, a noticeable segment of the audience has expressed disappointment, feeling conflicted about the apparent dissonance between Duplantis' lavish lifestyle and the modest means of everyday believers. Some have openly questioned whether the ministry's financial appeals and display of wealth remain aligned with core Christian values. This internal tension sometimes results in reduced donations and diminished participation in church activities. Younger church members, in particular, appear more skeptical, reflecting broader generational shifts around faith, authenticity, and social justice. Many in this group prioritize transparency and accountability, and they often voice concerns about how prosperity gospel teachings might exploit vulnerable individuals. This demographic shift presents a challenge for ministries anchored in traditional televangelism models. The backlash has also led some followers to distance themselves, either quietly or in plain sight, and in doing so, they end up talking about what faith leadership should actually embody in the modern world. Online social media forums and private groups often become the exact kind of spaces where those doubts get aired and re-aired again. In this whole setup, it gets harder for the ministry to keep cohesion among its diverse supporter base. On the other hand, Duplantis has built a narrative around making it past attacks by divine favor, and he frames opposition as spiritual warfare. That message lands well for many people who see criticism not as something ordinary, but as a kind of test of faith. And because of that, he rallies his loyal core, reinforcing commitment and in many cases deepening engagement among those who already buy into his ministry's vision. At the same time, the ministry keeps outreach moving through television broadcasts and international events, which looks like a strategy for expanding influence, even while controversies keep circulating. New and prospective followers are invited to experience healing and abundance, so the pipeline of support keeps moving forward. Still, whether this growth can be sustained will probably hinge on how the ministry responds to the ongoing criticisms. Financial pressures, prompted by shifting support levels, may also start to tilt internal dynamics that can potentially affect programming, staffing, and the overall direction of the ministry. How Duplantis adapts to these changes will be critical for the future viability of his faith community. This tension sets the stage for considering what lies ahead and how Duplantis might navigate the increasing calls for transparency and accountability. Future prospects and accountability. The future of Jesse Duplantis' ministry remains uncertain as controversy continues to follow his name. In today's climate, religious leaders are being judged not only by their sermons, but by how they handle money, power, and public trust. For Duplantis, this means accountability is no longer something he can avoid. The more questions surround his lifestyle and fundraising, the more pressure grows for transparency. One of his biggest challenges is the changing expectations among believers. Many people now want pastors to represent humility, responsibility, and openness. Duplantis' wealthy image, private jets, and prosperity-focused message have made him a symbol of everything critics question about modern televangelism. To keep support, he may need to show that his ministry is about more than luxury and personal success. Financial scrutiny could also end up shaping what happens next, Ministries that end up catching media attention often deal with watchdog pressure, particularly when donations are involved. If Duplantis wants to keep his public image looking clean, then clear financial reporting and stronger communication about charitable work may become necessary sooner rather than later. Just saying things might not be enough anymore, because followers may start asking for proof, real evidence, not only talk. His public relations approach will also matter in a very practical way. If he addresses critics directly, explains how the fundraising campaigns work, and shows measurable community impact, that could help rebuild trust. Still, long-term credibility probably won't come from temporary damage control. It will depend on actual changes made, not a short pause in the criticism. Inside his own ministry, Duplantis may also have to deal with rising skepticism among younger believers. Many are less willing to accept prosperity gospel teachings without question. And that's where things get complicated. A more balanced message about faith, humility, and wealth might help him reach a wider audience and maybe even lower the temperature of the criticism. Even so, Duplantis remains influential. Jesse Duplantis' journey reveals the complex intersection of faith, wealth, and accountability in today's religious landscape. As controversies mount, the challenge remains to balance spiritual passion with integrity and transparency. If you found this story insightful, please like this video and subscribe for more thoughtful explorations of faith and leadership. And before you go, watch the next video shown on the screen, where we uncover another powerful story about faith, influence, and the price of public trust.